Hello once again. This is Seth Nikwe from the Living Project, and welcome to another episode of THP Tutorials. In today's video, I want to be taking a look at management accounting. We'll be talking about the theoretical aspect of CVP analysis. That's the cost, volume, profit analysis, right? So, in this video, we will define what CVP is and also be looking at the techniques used to perform the cost, volume, profit analysis. We will also look at the calculation of the break-even point, margin of safety, the contribution to sales ratio formula, and also the determination of sales required for a target profit. So let's begin. But before we do, kindly hit the subscribe button and turn on the post notification. Let's begin. So the cost, volume, profit analysis. What is it? Now, it is defined as a study of the effects of changes in fixed cost, variable cost, sales price, quantity, and mix on future profit, right? So, to that again, the study of the effects of changes in fixed cost, variable cost, sales price, quantity, and mix. How you produce a product on future profits. So it's basically trying to, when you do CVP analysis, you're trying to analyze or study, the changes in our cost, our selling price, our quantity, and our mix to, the changes, the effect the changes would have on future profits, right? Now this is the term given to the study of the interrelationship between cost, volume, profit, and profit at various levels of activity, right, or levels of production. A common term used for this type of analysis is break-even analysis. Hence, the terms break-even analysis and CVP analysis tend to be used interchangeably, right? So, cost, volume, profit, or CVP analysis is the same as break-even analysis. Very well. Now, in business, there is a concept known as the break-even point. Right? The break-even point is the level of activity where there is no profit or no loss. Right? So, it's the level of activity or the level of production at which total revenue will be equal to total cost. Right? So, no loss will be incurred and no profit will be incurred as well. Right? It is the point where the full cost of production would be recovered and any further increase in the level of activity could lead to profits, right? So, at a break-even point, anything in the positive direction would lead to profit, right? Now, the CVP analysis uses many of the principles of marginal costing and is an important tool in short-term planning, right? Let me take that again. It says that the CVP analysis uses many of the principles of marginal costing and it's an important tool in short-term planning. It explores the relationship which exists between cost, revenue, output levels, and resulting profits. Very well. So, before we start the CVP analysis, there are assumptions that we stand upon, right? Any theory, any philosophical knowledge stands on assumptions, right? And for CVP, these are the assumptions. There are 7 assumptions, right? Be sure to know at least 5 offhand so that when it comes in exams, you can just write that down because it usually comes along with some practical questions, right? That can be like 5 marks. So that's something to know. So the first assumption is all costs can be revolved into fixed and variable elements. Fixed cost will remain constant and variable costs vary proportionately with activity, right? We discussed this in the second week, cost and cost behavior, right? That was when we said that fixed cost remains constant. Fixed cost doesn't change no matter the level of activity that the firm is performing at or producing, right? But for variable costs, they vary proportionately with activity. That's to say that they are constant per unit. right? So the third is over that activity range being considered cost and revenue. Over that activity range, right? Cost and revenue are considered to behave in a linear fashion. Linear fashion, right? Now the only factor affecting cost and revenue is volume. And the only factor affecting cost and revenue is volume. Technology, production methods and efficiency remain unchanged, right? So the technology that you are using, your production methods, the way you produce your product, and the efficiency with which you are producing your product remains the same. It does not change, right? Now the next assumption is particular for graphical methods. The analysis relates to one product only, right? So there are two aspects of the graphical aspect as well. We'll be covering that. But with the graphical methods, the analysis relates to one product only, right? There are no stock level changes or that stocks are valued at marginal cost only, right? There are no stock level changes or stocks are valued at marginal cost only, right? Well, right. Now let's talk about the concept of contribution. What is contribution? We'll get right onto that. Now we have earlier learned that the variable costs are those that vary with the level of activity. If we can identify the variable costs associated with producing and selling a product or service, we can highlight a very important measure, contribution. Right? So why is contribution an important measure? Now contribution is equal to the sales value minus the variable cost. Right? Remember that we said that profit is equal to what? The total revenue minus the total cost. Right? So sales revenue minus variable cost would leave out the fixed cost aspect, right? Now, if you have made sales beyond your break-even point, that would mean that if we subtract the variable cost from that sales value, you'll be left with portions of your fixed cost and your profits, right? Very well. Now, variable costs are sometimes referred to as marginal costs, and the two terms are often used interchangeably. We've mentioned this before, right? Now, the contribution is so called because it literally does contribute towards fixed costs and profits, right? That's the point I was getting to earlier. Now, contribution is once the contribution from a product or service has been calculated, the fixed costs associated with the product or service can be deducted to determine the profits for the period, right? So that's just basically what I was saying, that your fixed cost, so your contribution is equal to your sales revenue minus your variable cost, right? Use contribution. But how? And you know that profit is equal to total revenue minus total cost, right? Why does this make sense? So total revenue is the same as your sales revenue, right? Now, you know that total cost is made up of two things. You have variable cost and fixed cost. So if we only subtract our variable cost, it means that the portion of funds or money that will be left will be made up of a portion of our fixed cost and our profits, right? Very well. So when we subtract our fixed costs from our contribution, it should give us our profit, ultimately. So that's how the equation came about, that total fixed cost is equal to contribution, ultimate. Very well. So you always see it in the questions. So total fixed cost is equal to contribution. Now, so that's this one I read, right? That once the contribution from a product or service has been calculated, the fixed cost associated with the product or service can be deducted to determine the profits for the period. So you just, when you have a contribution, right? Sales revenue minus your variable cost. When you have that contribution, when you subtract your fixed cost from the contribution, it gives you a profit. Now, let's look at some of the formulas that we use to conduct the CVP analysis. CVP analysis can be undertaken by the graphical presentation or by a simple formula. The following formulas are applicable, right? So you have break-even points in units. That's the required contribution or the contribution per unit. Contribution per unit is given as selling price per unit minus the variable cost per unit. So that's always given the question. We solve the practical example. The link is in the description below. You know, myself and the THP boy. So you can just check out that video. And that's not what you think, right? It's something new that I'm trying. It's like a class session where you have it's more interactive than the usual me just teaching. So we thought about trying that out. So when you watch it, let us know if it's helpful, right? Now the two is the break-even point. That's the sales value. Right, so we have the calculation in units and the calculation in the sales value, right? Now the break-even point in units and then the break-even point in sales value, the formulas are practically the same. So basically, you can say that the break-even point in sales value is equal to the break-even point in units times the selling price per unit, right? Because required contribution over contribution per unit is the same as the formula for break-even points in units. So that's that. So moving on, the third formula is contribution to sales ratio, and that's equal to contribution per unit times 100 contribution per unit over selling price per unit times 100, right? So that's why it's called contribution to sales ratio. So contribution is always at the top, the selling price is at the bottom. Well, you need to have this formulas in your head because it's a likely question. For levels of sales to result in target profit in units, right? So right now, for this one, you have the unit calculation and then a sales value calculation, right? The unit is always going to give you an answer in units, and then the sales value is going to give you an answer in sales. Well, so this is required contribution plus target profit over contribution per unit. That's for the units. So it's always the same. If you are looking for the sales value, just multiply the units by the selling price per unit, right? Right. That's how we found for the break-even point in sales value too, right? So you just multiply that by the selling price per unit and you're good to go. Now, required contribution is the contribution required to cover the fixed cost resulting in no profit or loss. Therefore, required contribution is equal to total fixed cost, right? So this is a better explanation of the point that I was making now. When we say required contribution, you see, required contribution is different from contribution itself. I know, contribution as a whole. I remember that contribution is sales minus revenue. If you have your contribution from that portion, that contribution is made up of your profit and your fixed cost. So when you say required contribution, is the contribution that is required for you to break even, right? So when you make that amount of sales, it means that you not incur profit or you not incur loss. And any point, any sales that you make from that point would be a profit, right? So let's move on. Yeah, so now, how do you calculate the break-even point, right? How do you calculate the break-even point? As sales revenues grow from zero, the contribution also grows until it just covers the fixed cost, right? As sales grow from zero, contribution also grows until it covers just the fixed cost. This is the break-even point where neither profits nor sales are made, right? So that's the break-even point that I'm talking about. You start selling, then you start contributing. Until you meet your required contribution. That required contribution cancels your fixed cost. So now what happens? I'm making profits, right? But the point at which you cancel your fixed cost. That's the break-even point. So how do you calculate for that? It follows that to break even, the amount of contribution must exactly match the amount of fixed cost. Now, it follow if we know how much contribution is earned from each unit sold, then we can calculate the number of units required to break even as follows. If we know how much contribution is earned from each unit sold, then we can calculate the number of units required to break even as follows, right? Exactly. So the break-even point in units is given by your fixed cost or your contribution per unit. Remember I said earlier that the break-even point in units formula that you just saw, this one, the same as the one that I just talking about, right? But for this one, you see required contribution. And that the required contribution is the amount of contribution needed to cancel out your fixed cost, right? So this required contribution is the same as the fixed cost that I see now over here. Right, it's the same. Now, so we give here an example that's what, for example, suppose that an organization manufactures a single product incurring variable cost of 30 cedis per unit and fixed cost of 20,000 per month. If the product sells for 50 cedis per unit, then the break-even point can be calculated as follows, right? Obviously, I won't let the answer show. I'm going to clean that part out. But before that, let's just work it ourselves, right? We know that the contribution. So we're looking for break-even points in units, right? So we have B, E, P in units. Is the fixed cost or the contribution per unit. Now see, fixed cost was already given in the question as 20,000. Also have the variable cost. Now the selling price per unit. Now the variable cost right. Contribution per unit is the same as what? Selling price per unit minus variable cost per unit. The selling price per unit in the question was 50. Variable cost was 30. That gives us what? 20,000 or 20. This cell cancel is 1,000. $1,000. Alright. If you're not to get for the break-even point in sales, all you have to do is just multiply this 1,000 units by the selling price of 50. That gives you what? 50,000. Right. Excellent. Let's proceed. So that's it. Now you can see the answer. So yeah, you have a practical question. Right? It's a practical question, it's a full question. Won't solve it. You know, we have a practical, we didn't solve this in a practical aspect, but you know, we can watch the practical aspect and come back to this and just try it for yourself. It's very easy. So the answers are right here. Try and see if you can. Margin of safety. So let me show you the answers. So these are the answers. Don't copy you. Just try it for yourself. Okay. So margin of safety, right? What's margin of safety? Now the margin of safety is a measure of by how much actual sales can fall short of the budgeted sales volume without a loss being incurred, right? So remember that CVP analysis is all about future profit, right? So there's a lot of budgeting involved. There's a lot of expectations being made, and a margin of safety is relevant because it's like a fail safe, right? So even if we miss within this range, it should be okay, right? So that the margin of safety is a measure of by how much actual sales can fall short of the budgeted sales without a loss being incurred. Very well. Now it is the difference between the expected level of sales and the break-even point, right? So let's say that you have a break-even point in the question that we just solved of 1,000 units. If you are being smart and you know that our break-even point, to break even, we have to sell 1,000 units. We can have a projected sales of, let's say, 1,600. So even if we don't meet that 1,600 expectation, we should still be within that range so as to avoid making a loss, right? Now, the larger the margin of safety, the more likely it is that a profit will be made. That is, if sales start to fall. There is more leeway before the organization begins to incur loss, right? So when you use your expected sales, which is way higher than your break-even point, you know that even if you get to a certain level, maybe you get to 1,300 instead of the 1,600, you know that your break-even point is 1,000. So within that 300 units, you are still making your profit, right? Exactly. And you need to fall back 300 units before you start actually making a loss. So the margin of safety is very, very relevant. Now, in the illustration one, if forecast sales are 7,000 units per month, the margin of safety can be easily calculated as follows. I won't go there. So the example that I gave you, that's the one that I'll be using. All right. So this BEP was 1,000 units. So the BEP was what? Right. Now, the formula for margin of safety, right, in units, is equal to what? Projected or budgeted sales. Minus the given point. Right. So let's say we make our projected sales 1,500. To get our margin of safety in units, we just subtract the projected or budgeted sales from the break-even point in units. That gives us 500 units. So our margin of safety in units becomes 500 units. Now, how do you express this margin of safety as a percentage? Right. So to do that, that will be what? The margin of safety units over the projected sales, projected or budgeted sales, times 100. This will have given us 500 over 1,500 times 100. Got my calculator over here. That's sad. What is the answer? Yeah, then. I got my calculator over here. Yeah. So, yeah. But this was not covered in the video. So it was not covered in the practical aspect of the video. So pay attention. But it doesn't usually come. Let me quickly pull up the calculator and check because it's important. What am I doing? Calculator. Right, so we had 500 over 15 basically. So 500 divided by 15. That gives 33.33%. So that's our margin of safety. Very well. So let's proceed. Contribution to sales ratio. That's a CS ratio. Now, as discussed earlier, the contribution to sales ratio is a measure of the percentage of contribution compared to sales. A higher contribution to sales ratio means the contribution grows more quickly as sales increase. It is sometimes referred to as the profit volume ratio, right? So contribution to sales ratio is sometimes referred to as the profit to volume ratio. Now, the higher the CS ratio, the more quickly the contribution grows as sales increase, right? So this is the formula. I'll be writing it. Don't worry. You cover this also in there. Right. So you can actually use the CS ratio to find your break-even point in sales, not unit, sales. So that's given by the fixed cost or the contribution to sales ratio, right? So that's one thing that needs to be always considered. So always keep that in mind and do justice to that. Now, obviously, you can use your break-even point. Let me explain this one at a down. This aspect. Let me explain how this formula was derived. Remember earlier, I said about our break-even point in units in sales. It's given by what? A break-even point in units times the selling price per unit. Right. If I want to make this the subject, then this has to come over here. Since this is multiplying, the selling price per unit is multiplying. I have to divide both sides by the selling price. So this gives me what? A given point in units is equal to a given point in sales follow out. That's just your basic change of subject, right? Then you get your. That's how you explain the figure in the question. Very well. So apparently that brings us to an end. These two questions were all solved in the practical aspect. So can you check that video out? Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.